pretty much is everything. And I put every single light detail in the handout so you can comfortably follow through, and you have the models as well. I think Tanya has her hand up if you have a question. Do you? Oh,
Um,
sorry. Yes, go ahead. Oh, I wasn't paying attention. I'm sorry. I apologize.
if we look at the previous exercises that we did, if I wanted, let's say I'm working on a sculptural form and I want to subtract a section, so then I can use the clipping plane and then set the function extract, and then it will slice it. So the plane becomes a slicer.
Yeah, so I mean, you can think of extracting a clipping sections in a place. This is like in a 3D place, in its natural 3D place. It's there, and it just basically intersect the clipping plane with the objects or the model and create it there in the 3D space. If you want to extract it as a drawing, with backgrounds, with that you want to like maybe put in layouts, or that is a flat on the XY plane, then you run the clipping drawings command in that case. So this is the main distinctions between the two. Extracting it in a 3D model space is perhaps a modeling aid. It's used to, like I said, for example, if you had a messy scan that you want to clean up and you just want to almost like contour through it and then use these curves to recreate the model, you can use it for that purpose. But generally, we don't use it for the purpose of getting the drawings itself. Um, One case I could think of, though, if you want to use the workflow that I showed before the drawing, which is you just want the view to align with your section and it's a clipped, you can extract the clipping drawing in a place in a 3D, and you will at least have the section lines as vector drawing in that location. And you can use it and export it with your drawing, if that makes sense. So that's another use case for it. Is the distinction kind of clear? You can think of one of them as dynamic make 2D and the other as section command and contour commands, but with history enabled. Does that make sense?
What I meant is, the way you're slicing it for CNC milling or laser cutting,
Yeah.
can we use that same strategy when we work on a model and we want to remove, let's say, 1/3 of it or half of it? So the slicing, the clipping plane becomes like a slicer.
So is that only for viewing, or if you want
No,
to
no,
get
and then you
part of?
save it and you 3D print it as a sculptural form.
I see. I see. So is that workflow, if you set up the distance to be such that it actually, whenever first slice and the next one starts, then you will actually have sliced the model. What you want to do is, I guess, you wanted to create planes and you want to split the model with these planes. So instead of having created a clipping planes, you could have created just simple planes on the XY plane, like as a workflow that I can think of for what you are describing, and correct me if I'm wrong. If you have created a plane, and I'm just going to hide all those guys, you want to array that plane. I'll run the array command and I'll do the same I did 14, and you want to kind of split your object. And am I going in the right direction with you? So you
The
want to kind
thing
of split with this, with
that
these.
I know. It's just that with the clipping plane, what I find interesting is that it it affects the object, so the section that you're clipping disappears. So you can play with it and then visualize different possibilities. Where
Oh,
you use a cutting plane, you know exactly where you want to cut, and then you have a plane. But when you're not sure and you want to play with the form and look at different options, I
I
was
see.
thinking that the cutting the that clipping plane becomes an interesting tool if it could turn into a cutting plane when you use the selection that you use for the array when you slice it.
Okay. Okay. So what you want basically is that like you have used this and you have placed them at a different kind of distances and what have you, and you decided that these are the slices that you wanted to extract in the end. You want to select the clipping planes and use them as a slicers of your model.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get that. I don't know if split command accept or if there is a way to transition from a clipping a plane to a plane to do the splitting. But that would be an interesting thing. I don't think it's hard to do as a simple script to just change each clipping plane into a physical plane and use it to split your model in the end. But there isn't one command to do that because I don't think split allows you to select a clipping plane. You can select the object, but you cannot select these as the cutting objects. But maybe we can support that. I'll write that down because that is interesting. Yeah.
Because you're basically doing it with the array example.
Yeah.
You know, you're slicing.
I am slicing with the
So if
extract slices, yes, but not
if you
exactly.
have only one clipping plane, you can't you do the same thing? Do extract slice or extract
Extract the slice doesn't take into account one from one clipping plane to the next. It doesn't cut it through. It doesn't slice them. Yeah, it extract the portion. Um, that it treats the clipping plane as a center plane basically through your slice, and then you have to give it a specific thickness. But in this case you have variable thickness, as you can see. But a very simple script, even a grasshopper script, can do exactly what you're saying. You select your clipping planes and then you slice the model with it.
yeah,
And
because you
yeah.
see, artists are visual people, so it's
Yes.
nice to play with your object and look at different options. So I thought that the clipping plane was an interesting way of
Extract the
adding or
slice. Mm.
removing material on an object.
This could be an option on the extract the slices, which is basically slice the model itself with all the clipping planes. I'll have to look into it, but thank you. Yes, that's an interesting question. We'll look into it.
It's basically like it's good if you want to take cardboard and cut each slice and then stick them together and smooth it out. But if you want to just split it and then
Yeah.
3D print each piece, not so much.
Yes, splitting. Would you need it to be laid out on the XY plane as well? The base of each slice? Is that a useful function?
Yeah.
Yes.
Could be. You see, I'm working on a project where my file is very big,
Yeah.
so I would need to cut it in sections.
Mhm.
But I would like to be able to use something like the clipping plane and then move it around and see where is the best
Where
place or the
exactly
best
to?
angle to slice
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
And then once I get it, instead of having to build a cutting plane just to slice with the,
Slice with the clipping plane itself. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
almost split command that accept a clipping plane as the splitter object. That's
yeah.
all you need. I think this is a very simple request, like it can be supported very easily. I'll create a request for it. Thank you. That's really good to hear that. I mean, that's the fun thing about doing these because you guys are the ones that are using the tools, and we'd love to make it useful to you. So, okay, we have a few hands up, and I don't know the order of them. You guys know better. So, David or Tanya, one of you guys can jump in.
With regard to extracting slices, with the idea of making laser cut parts out of a flat stock from those slices,
Mm-hmm.
how would you flatten those slices so as to capture the maximum perimeter on a tapered object that's been sliced?
That's a good question. I think instead of extracting slices, I would extract sections. And this way you already have the curves instead of having to flatten those. I know you'd like to capture the maximum, but that is going to be if you have a more dense kind of slices, at least
The, the
at
problem with that is
mm,
that you have tapers in two directions.
mm,
You have
yeah.
some tapers that are smaller going up and some that are larger going up. So you need to capture both the top and bottom of each slice and then project onto a 2D plane to figure your outline for your laser cutter.
That's kind of interesting, but I'm like, my question is this: why don't you just extract the sections themselves like we did instead?
Well, if you
Nested
extract a
them.
section
Hmm.
and then you're going to laser cut out of a material that has a thickness
Hmm.
and the portion of your part above that section is larger,
Mm.
then you're going to have a slice that cannot be materially subtracted down to the taper that you want if we're doing subtractive
I
manufacturing.
see, because
So
your laser cutting allows you to do a tapered cut as well, you say.
Well,
no,
if you
really,
don't have that capability with a lower cost three-axis laser, or
You do.
more
Okay.
like a 2.5 axis laser, you're going to get straight-sided slabs, and then when you stack them, you need to be able to machine down from that.
yeah,
Okay, okay, that's very interesting. Okay, I'd love to see a file. I'd love to see a file of how it is represented and that the laser cutter accepted. So is it two curves inside each other, basically, to one of them represent the upper and one of them represent the lower, for example? Is that how it's represented before you send it to the laser cutter?
Well, that's actually the question I'm asking you. If you take a
um,
slice of your solid object, you get an upper outline and a lower outline, and then you need to project those onto a common plane
Yep.
and capture the perimeter of those two outlines, the maximal perimeter of those two outlines, and that
Yeah.
becomes the outline that you drive your laser.
Sorry, but just like give me a second here because I want to kind of understand that. Um, it depends on the laser cutter itself and what kind of format it's taking. So if you have a laser cutter that allows you to cut a tapered part, so you are extracting slices and then from the slices you get the upper and the lower or the maximum kind of parameter, and now you end up with two curves, right, for each slice, basically.
Yeah.
Um, and these two curves need to go to two separate layers so that the laser cutter knows which one is the upper and which
No,
one is the lower. No.
no, they need to be smashed onto one layer, and then you find the maximum perimeter of those two curves.
Oh, and you union them basically. So you basically union the curves and
Yes.
so
If
what you are describing is like doable through a script at this point, but once we put that script together that actually works for you, we can encapsulate it as an option in one of the commands. So I'd love to work with you, David. I'd want to see what would you do manually to be able to prep that particular object for laser cutting that has
well,
tapering. And once
this
I
has
see that, I can do it. I turn it into a command.
Yeah, this has many applications. People build things out of styrofoam that's cut with a vertical hot wire. So it's basically a
Hmm.
three-axis operation. You don't have the ability to tip the cutting tool.
Mm.
Three-axis CNC mill or
Hmm.
CNC router, the same kind
Hmm.
of thing. They're all the same type of operation, and you end up with slabs that are stacked together, and then you somehow, most usually manually, blend those slabs together to get your final object shape.
Okay. No, I'd love to support that operation. I just want to kind of understand exactly what the output is that is going to be fed into the laser cutter. And once I have that, I can turn it into I can support it in the command. So if you may,
Okay,
just
I'll invent
yeah,
something and send you a file.
just send me a file. Yeah, invent something, send me a file that you know it's going to cut it properly and with the steps. And that's all I need. And I can support your operation.